"You don't belong in this kitchen." He said it loud enough for the whole floor to hear, and the old man in the white uniform just smiled. Nobody at Hartwell Regional Medical Center knew what to make of Otis Dunbar the first time they saw him. 67 years old. 5'8", maybe. Shoulders that curved forward from decades of leaning over things. Counters, cutting boards, the low shelves of walk-in freezers. He had a face that looked like it had been left in the sun too long and never quite recovered. Deep lines around the mouth. Hands that were wide and rough and permanently stained at the knuckles from years of handling spices and smoke and cast iron. He walked with a slight drag in his right foot, a souvenir from a bus accident in 2009 that nobody ever asked him about. He wore a plain white uniform on his first day, pressed, spotless. He'd ironed it himself at 5 in the morning before driving 40 minutes across town to get there. He was hired as a prep cook. Level 1. The kind of position you give someone when you don't know where else to put them, and you're short-staffed, and the holiday season is 3 weeks out. The woman who hired him, a tired HR coordinator named Gwen, apologized when she handed him the offer letter. "It's not much," she said. "Hours are 6 to 2, pays $14.50. "That's fine," Otis said. "I just want to work." She looked at him over her reading glasses for a second longer than necessary. The way people look at you when they're trying to figure out what you used to be. He didn't offer anything. He just signed the form and folded his copy neatly into his breast pocket. That was the thing about Otis Dunbar. He never explained himself. He'd learned a long time ago that people don't listen to explanations. They listen to evidence. And he'd learned something else, too. Something his grandmother told him when he was 9 years old, sitting on her porch in rural Georgia with a glass of sweet tea and nowhere to be. "Quiet waters run deep, baby. Don't ever let nobody rush your river." He never forgot that. The kitchen at Hartwell Regional wasn't a restaurant kitchen. It fed 1,100 patients a day across 6 floors. Cafeteria lines, dietary trays, special meals for cardiac, diabetic, post-surgical. It ran like a factory floor, loud, hot, relentless, unforgiving of slowness or error. The executive chef was a 34-year-old named Jordan Cleve. Jordan had graduated from the Culinary Institute of America at 22. He'd done a stage in Lyon, France. He'd worked under 2 James Beard Award nominees. He'd landed at Hartwell 3 years ago, hired to modernize the food program and cut costs without losing patient satisfaction scores. A contradiction he handled by being aggressive about control and defensive about his reputation. He was the kind of person who needed every room to know he was the smartest person in it. When he saw Otis on his first morning, standing quietly by the prep station with his peeling knife already in hand, Jordan's face did something complicated. "You're the new hire?" He looked at the schedule on his clipboard. "Dunbar?" "Yes, sir." "How old are you?" 67. Jordan's jaw shifted. He glanced at the sous chef, a young woman named Petra, then caught himself and looked back at his clipboard. "You done hospital food before?" "I've done food," Otis said. Jordan looked up slowly. "That's not an answer. 38 years of cooking," Otis said. "That's the answer." Jordan studied him for a moment the way a person studies a menu item they're not sure they ordered. Then he pointed toward the vegetable station. A mountain of sweet potatoes, a box of onions, a flat of celery, mirepoix, brunoise cut. 60 pounds by 8 o'clock. Brunoise, 1/8 inch dice, 60 pounds of vegetables, 90 minutes. Most prep cooks at Otis's level would have taken 2 hours, minimum. Some would have asked what brunoise meant. Otis set down his clipboard, tied his apron, and picked up his knife. At 7:42, he set the last container on the rack and walked it to the line. Jordan was already there. He picked up a piece of celery, examined it under the overhead light, set it down without saying a word. He walked away. That was the beginning. For the first 2 weeks, Otis did what they asked him to do: prep work, stock rotation, receiving deliveries. The jobs that nobody wanted because they were invisible. The infrastructure of a kitchen that everyone depended on and no one acknowledged. He arrived first and left last. He cleaned his station before anyone asked. He never made mistakes on the dietary restrictions, not once, which mattered enormously in a hospital kitchen where a wrong ingredient could kill someone. The other cooks noticed before Jordan did. Petra noticed first. She was 29, sharp-eyed, good with sauces. She caught herself watching Otis one morning as he broke down a whole side of salmon, swift, clean, economical, not emotion wasted, the kind of knife work that doesn't happen in 6 months of culinary school. The kind that happens over decades. "Where'd you learn to do that?" she asked. Otis didn't look up. "Louisiana, then New York, then Chicago. You cook in restaurants?" "For a while." "What happened?" He was quiet for a second. His knife kept moving. "Life," he said. "Life happened. Petra didn't push it. She had the sense that some things were offered in pieces, not all at once. The day everything changed started with a Wednesday. A hospital board member was coming for lunch. Not unusual. It happened twice a year. Jordan would prepare a private meal for the board in the executive conference room on the 4th floor. 5 courses. The kind of food that didn't belong in a hospital and knew it. It was the one day Jordan cooked from scratch instead of managing other people's cooking. He'd been planning the menu for 2 weeks. He'd ordered specialty ingredients, duck breast, black truffle, a case of heirloom tomatoes. He'd typed up a 3-page prep list. Tuesday night, the walk-in refrigerator on the east side malfunctioned. By 6 Wednesday morning, the duck was compromised. The truffle was fine. The tomatoes were salvageable. But the protein centerpiece, gone. Jordan arrived at 6:15 to find his sous chef standing in front of the open walk-in, face pale. Jordan didn't yell. He went very quiet in a way that was worse than yelling. He pulled out his phone. He called 3 suppliers. It was too early. Nobody answered. He stood in the middle of the kitchen with 12 board members arriving at noon and no main course. Otis had been there since 5:30. He was at the back of the kitchen, breaking down a crate of winter squash. He heard everything. He waited until Jordan put his phone in his pocket. "What do you have in the dry storage?" Otis asked. Quietly, not to the room, just to Jordan. Jordan turned and looked at him the way you look at a child who has just wandered into a conversation between adults. "This isn't your concern. I'm not trying to make it my concern," Otis said. "I'm trying to help you solve a problem." Jordan stared at him for a long moment. "I have a solution," he said. "I don't need your input." He turned back to his phone and tried the suppliers again. Otis went back to his squash. At 9:30, Jordan had secured a replacement protein, a mediocre cut from a local broadliner, nothing like what he'd planned, and he knew it. He could already hear the adjustment in his head, the mental rewriting of a dish he'd spent 2 weeks building. He walked past Otis's station without stopping. "Tell me what you'd do," he said. Not warmly, reluctantly, like a man asking for directions when he's sure he knows the road. Otis set down his knife. "Rabbit," he said. "You got 2 whole rabbits in the back of the reach-in, been there 3 days. Braise them slow in the truffle jus. Pull the meat off, roll it in caul fat, sear it quick right before service. Serve it over a roasted squash puree with the heirloom tomatoes blistered on top. It takes longer, but you've got time and the flavor profile works better than duck anyway." Jordan was quiet for a full 10 seconds. "Caul fat braised rabbit," he said, like he was testing the words. "It's not original," Otis said. "It's a French farmhouse technique, been around 300 years. Works because the fat bastes the meat from the outside in. The truffle ties it to what you planned. Where'd you learn that?" Otis picked up his knife again. "Lyon," he said. 1987. Jordan didn't respond, but he walked to the reach-in, pulled out the rabbits, and set them on the counter. He didn't ask Otis to help. He didn't acknowledge what had just happened. But he used the technique. The board lunch ran 40 minutes over because nobody wanted to stop eating. That afternoon, a maintenance worker named Reggie came to fix the reach-in. He and Otis had talked a few times in the break room, the quiet, easy conversation of 2 men in their 60s who didn't need to impress anyone. "Heard the lunch went well," Reggie said. "Heard that too," Otis said. "Jordan take credit?" Otis smiled. "Just a small one. The kind that lives at the corner of the mouth and doesn't need an audience." He made a good dish, Otis said. That's what matters. Reggie looked at him for a moment. You're either a saint, he said, or you're waiting for something. Otis didn't answer that. 3 days later, Jordan called a staff meeting. The hospital's dietary program was being reviewed for a new grant. A community wellness initiative that would fund an expanded patient education kitchen, cooking classes for low-income families, and a hospital-run nutrition program in 3 underserved neighborhoods. The grant committee was visiting in 6 weeks. They wanted to see a demonstration kitchen in action, a live presentation, and a philosophy statement from the program's culinary lead. It was a $750,000 grant. Jordan stood at the front of the kitchen with his arms crossed. This is the biggest opportunity this hospital has had in a decade, he said. I'll be leading the presentation. I need my best people on the demo. Petra, you're on the sauce station. Marcus, you're doing the bread component. He went down the list. 8 names. None of them Otis. Otis sat in the back row and said nothing. After the meeting, Petra found him at his station. He didn't put you on the list, she said. I saw that. You saved that board lunch. Jordan cooked it. Petra made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She went back to her station. That evening, before he left, Otis stopped by the administrative office and asked Gwen if he could see the grant proposal documents. Public record, already filed. She printed them for him without asking why. He drove home. He made a pot of coffee. He sat at his kitchen table under the one good lamp and read the full 73-page grant proposal until 11:15 at night. When he finished, he got a yellow legal pad from the drawer beside the refrigerator, and he started writing. Otis Dunbar had not always been a prep cook. For those who didn't know, and that was everyone in that kitchen, because he hadn't told anyone, Otis had spent 22 years as the executive chef and co-owner of a restaurant called K1866 in New Orleans. Not a tourist restaurant, not a French Quarter seafood house. A small, serious place on Magazine Street with 26 seats and a 2-year waiting list for the first 4 years it was open. K1866 was reviewed twice in the New York Times, once in 1994, once in 2001, both times favorably, in the careful language critics use. When they're trying to say something is transcendent without sounding like they've lost their professional composure. Otis had cooked for 2 sitting governors, a Supreme Court justice, and once, on a private visit that was never publicized, a former president who had heard about the short rib. He was also, for 12 years, the chair of the Culinary Arts Advisory Board at Xavier University of Louisiana. He'd helped design their curriculum. He'd mentored 43 students through the program. 31 of them were now working chefs or restaurateurs. He had a James Beard nomination in 2003. He didn't win. He drove home from the ceremony and made biscuits, because that was what his mother had always done when something didn't go her way. In 2011, his wife Lucinda was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. He closed K1866 in 2012. No announcement, no farewell dinner. He sold his equipment, paid his staff a full month's severance out of his own savings, and went home to take care of her. He cooked for her every day. Even when she stopped recognizing the plates. Even when she stopped recognizing him. He cooked because it was the only way he knew to say, "I love you" in a language that didn't require her memory to receive it. Lucinda died in the spring of 2019. Otis spent 2 years barely leaving the house. His daughter Simone, who lived in Atlanta, called every Sunday. She never pushed, she just called. In 2021, he got a phone call from an old colleague who said there was a hospital in the city that needed kitchen help and didn't care how old you were. He almost didn't apply. He sat with the job listing on his laptop for 6 days before he finally sent in his resume. He didn't put K1866 on it. He didn't put the Beard nomination. He didn't put Xavier University. He put 38 years of professional cooking experience and left the rest for people to discover if they cared to look. Nobody looked. The night Otis read the grant proposal, something settled in him that had been loose for a long time. The grant wasn't just about a demonstration kitchen. It was about what the committee called culinary memory, the idea that food knowledge in underserved communities was being lost across generations, that hospital food programs had a unique opportunity to become preservation sites for cultural recipes and nutrition traditions. The committee wanted a program that could connect patients to the food of their own heritage as part of recovery and wellness. Otis had spent 22 years doing exactly that at K1866. He wrote for 3 hours. He wrote about a grandmother who survived the Depression by knowing how to feed a family of 8 on beans, fatback, and what grew in the garden. He wrote about the intersection of food and memory and healing. He wrote about what it meant to hand a sick person a bowl of something that tasted like home. He wrote about what happens to a community when that knowledge disappears. Not with a bang, but slowly, a generation at a time, like a language nobody's speaking anymore. He didn't frame it as his idea. He framed it as what the grant committee had already said they wanted, answered directly and specifically. He sealed the pages in an envelope and put it in his bag. The next morning he placed it on Gwen's desk with a note that said, "For whoever's reviewing the grant presentation, just a thought." He didn't put his name on the note. Gwen knew his handwriting. What happened next, nobody saw coming, not Petra, not Reggie, not Jordan. The grant committee sent a preliminary questionnaire to the hospital 2 weeks before the site visit. One of the questions asked the program to describe the culinary philosophy and community connection of the kitchen's current staff. Gwen, who had read Otis's pages 3 times before forwarding them, included them in the hospital's response, not as an anonymous submission. Under Otis Dunbar's name. Jordan found out on a Tuesday morning when the committee's project director emailed the hospital's administrator and specifically asked if Otis Dunbar, formerly of K1866, would be available to speak at the site visit. Jordan read the email in his office. Then he walked out onto the kitchen floor, stopped at Otis's station, and said, loudly, with 4 other people present, "You don't belong in this kitchen." Otis looked up from the stock he was tending. The burner was on low. The smell of thyme and bay leaf and roasted bones was drifting across the whole back wall. "I'm sorry? You heard me. You went around me. You submitted something to the grant committee without my authorization. That is insubordination, and I won't have it in my kitchen." Otis set down his spoon. He did not raise his voice. He did not step back. "I left a document on the HR coordinator's desk," he said. "Unjung. Nothing in my employment agreement prohibits that. You don't get to decide what's relevant to my grant presentation." "It's the hospital's grant presentation," Otis said. "I believe." Jordan's face changed. The thing beneath the performance came up, the cold, cornered fury of a man who's realized he's been outmaneuvered by someone he'd never thought to watch. He pointed toward the door. "Clear your station," he said. "I'm terminating your probationary employment. Today." 4 people in the kitchen stopped moving. Petra's knife went still. Reggie, who was doing a follow-up check on the reach-in, turned from the refrigerator. Nobody said anything. Otis Dunbar untied his apron, folded it, set it on the counter beside his knife. "All right," he said quietly. The way a man says something he's already at peace with. He picked up his bag. He walked out. He did not slam a door. He did not say another word. He walked past the prep line and the dish station and the receiving dock and out into the parking lot where the November air was cold and thin and the sky was the color of old pewter. He sat in his car for a few minutes. Then he called Simone. "Dad, what happened?" he told her. All of it. There was a long silence on her end. "Dad," she said, "do you still have your copy of the pages?" "Yes." "And the email from the committee director? The one asking for you specifically?" "I don't have that, but Gwen does." Another silence. "Do you remember?" Simone said. "That I've been a labor attorney for 11 years? Otis smiled. "The same small one. The one that lives at the corner of the mouth." "I do remember that," he said. Simone Dunbar drove up from Atlanta on a Thursday. She was 41, compact, deliberate, with her father's eyes and her mother's jaw, and a way of sitting perfectly still when she was about to say something that mattered. She met with the hospital's legal department on a Friday afternoon with a single folder and a yellow legal pad. The folder contained 4 things. First, a copy of Otis's pages, time-stamped when they were dropped on Gwen's desk. Second, a printout of the committee director's email, obtained from Gwen with her full cooperation. Third, a signed statement from Petra, who had been in the kitchen when Jordan made the termination public, documenting the exact words used. Fourth, a printout of Jordan's publicly available performance review for the previous fiscal year, which showed that the community wellness grant had been listed under his personal professional development goals. A grant that, it now appeared, he'd had limited capacity to deliver on without the exact kind of institutional knowledge that Otis possessed. Simone laid the folder on the table and said nothing for 5 seconds. Then she said, "My father was terminated for submitting an anonymous document to a hospital coordinator, a document that, based on the grant committee's direct response, may be the difference between this hospital receiving $750,000 in federal funding and not receiving it. I'd like to understand how the hospital plans to explain that to the committee director, who is currently awaiting a response about whether Mr. Dunbar will be present for the site visit." The hospital's legal team asked for 48 hours. They called back in 6. Otis was reinstated the following Monday. Jordan Cleave submitted his resignation the same week. The hospital's administrator later confirmed, without elaborating, that the departure was mutually agreed upon. The grant committee's site visit took place on a Thursday in December. The air in the hospital's newly designated demonstration kitchen was warm and smelled like something that had been simmering since early morning. Otis Dunbar stood at the front of the room. He was in chef's whites, pressed, spotless. He had not written notes. He did not need them. He talked for 40 minutes about what food does for a person who is frightened, what it does for a person who is far from home, what it means to hand someone a bowl of something that carries inside it the memory of a kitchen they love, a person they've lost, a place they can't return to. He talked about his grandmother's hands, about Lucinda, about the students at Xavier who came in not knowing how to boil water and left with a philosophy. He cooked as he talked, a simple dish, white beans with smoked turkey, collard greens, a wedge of cornbread, the kind of food that doesn't announce itself, the kind that sits down beside you. One of the committee members, a woman in her late 50s, set down her pen halfway through and just watched. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then the committee chair said, "Mr. Dunbar, would you be willing to lead this program?" Otis looked at the woman who had set down her pen. She was still watching him. "Yes," he said. "I would." The grant was awarded the following February. $750,000, 3-year term, renewable. The program was named the Cane and Ember Community Kitchen, a name the grant committee had proposed themselves, after the committee chair went home that night and looked up who Otis Dunbar actually was. The first classes started in March. Free, open to anyone, priority given to patients discharged from the hospital and their families. The first session had 16 people. The second had 31. By June, there was a waiting list. Petra became the lead instructor for the youth program. She had asked for the position. Otis had said yes without hesitating. Reggie's daughter enrolled in the 3rd session. She had high blood pressure, 3 kids under 10, and no idea how to cook the food her own mother used to make. By the end of 8 weeks, she could. She called her mother and read her the recipe out loud over the phone, and they both cried. That story made it into the grant committee's annual report as evidence of program impact. Otis never mentioned Jordan Cleave, not once, not to the media, not to the committee, not to the staff. When a local news segment on the program asked him about the circumstances that led to his appointment, he said, "The right people ended up in the right places. That's all." There's something I keep coming back to, thinking about Otis Dunbar and what happened in that hospital kitchen. It's not the win. Wins are satisfying, but they're not the part that stays with you. What stays with me is what he did in the parking lot after Jordan fired him. He sat in his car. He called his daughter. He didn't rage, he didn't spiral. He looked at what he had and he started from there. That's not passivity. That's not resignation. That is the most disciplined kind of confidence there is. The kind that doesn't need to perform itself, because it already knows what it's made of. Otis had been invisible for a long time. He'd chosen that, at least in part. Grief does something to a person's relationship with the world. It makes the small, quiet jobs feel like mercy. You don't have to be seen when you're folding yourself small. Nobody expects much. Nothing else can be taken. But there's a cost to that too, because when the moment comes, and it always comes, the people who dismissed you are not expecting what's actually there. The committee director wasn't surprised by the quality of Otis's writing. She was surprised it hadn't been visible sooner. That's the part I want you to sit with. Not the victory, the waiting, the years in that quiet house, cooking for Lucinda when she couldn't taste it anymore. The morning he ironed a white uniform at 5 a.m. for a job that paid $14.50 an hour. The way he answered Jordan's question about Lion with 2 words, and then picked up his knife and went back to work. He wasn't waiting for rescue. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was waiting for the moment that was worth standing up for, and when it came, he stood up. Not loudly, not theatrically. He placed pages on a desk. He spoke the truth in a room that was ready to hear it. He made white beans and cornbread, and told 30 people what food actually means. Tell me, have you ever known someone like that? Someone the world had filed away, put in a box, counted out, and then one day the box fell open? Drop it in the comments. I want to know. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe they're in the quiet season. Maybe they've been carrying something nobody else can see. Maybe they just need to know the waiting isn't wasted. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. Because this channel isn't about spectacle. It's about the people nobody clocks twice. The ones who ironed their uniform at 5 in the morning and drove 40 minutes to a job they were overqualified for. Because showing up with dignity is its own kind of answer. Next week, I'm bringing you a story about a woman who lost everything at 62 and quietly built something that outlasted the people who thought she was done. Don't miss it. And if nothing else, remember this: quiet waters run deep. Don't ever let nobody rush your river.